I'm Dakota. We're at ASM Motorsports, and we are building a S2000 to race in the GLTC series for GRIDLIFE. And as you can see from the pile of parts behind us, this thing's a bare shell, like bare shell. All it has is a cage in it at this point, and it needs some love. So we are going to install our full GLTC package in this car, and hopefully get it done in like roughly a week. First things first, we need to make this shell a roller. So I'm gonna get the driveline in, suspension in, get this thing rolling. Most everything's prepped, so this should go together very quickly. And then once that's all done, the master wiring specialist Andy is going to take over and get this thing all wired up.
Engine harness, we are converting the K20 ECU plugs along with this is the C101 chassis harness. Converting those to Haltech, and then I'm making my own chassis power connector that will be powered off the AIM PDM. So most of this is getting chopped apart and not used, just a few power wires. Both of these will end up going into the Haltech AMP connectors. Basically taking all of these connectors and converting it into kind of these. What we did is took the factory case K20 ECU plugs, just chopped them off, along with the old, the C101, it's the chassis connector. So since we're not going to any factory power or factory chassis, we're actually wiring to a PDM, I wired in this DT6 connector. This has basically 6 total wires that'll end up going to the PDM. We've got our 2 CAN bus, which is that first white and blue. Everything that the Haltech knows, it'll be sent over to the PDM just via those 2 CAN wires. The other wires on this are power for the ECU, power for the coils, and then starter signal. And then one more is just a ground wire. So 6 total wires going into the ECU. So beyond the ECU wiring, the only other real modifications we do here is we're using an F-Series intake manifold. So this is using a B-Series TPS. So I've got little adapters there that just go from the B-Series over to a K-Series. Both K and F-Series use the same injectors plug and the same coil plug. So that all fits right in. Same with the alternator. Alternators are kind of a universal Honda plug. Idle valve. That's really about it. Most of the stuff we don't use. Temp sensor. I'm not using the factory map sensor. We're actually going to run a vacuum line that goes into Haltech's onboard map sensor, which that will help keep vibrations and harmonics off the map sensor. We've had issues with the sensor on here going bad just from all the vibrations and everything from these engines. So yeah, that's about it. brief overview. We've got the, there's our AIM PDM dash, Haltech ECU, keypad. I still have to actually mount the PDM, which that'll go usually right there. Got our EPS box, our wideband controller, our ABS module. So a lot of that stuff is factory parts, and we take out all of the factory electrical stuff and we thin it out and grab the wires, only the wires that we need. So I got most of the boring stuff done. The EPS box has power ground coming in, and then the power ground going out to the rack, and then a couple signals, power signal and an engine pulse signal, which I actually replicate via the AIM PDM, just constant pulse, just to give the power steering enough to work in its lowest setting mode, which allows, basically gives the most amount of feedback to the driver. When they're in high assist, it's almost too easy of steering. You start to not feel all the little things. So we just run it in the low power mode, and that's enough for honestly everything. Even some of the high compression like NCM or Barber, you don't fully lose power steering. You still have it. It is a little heavier in the wheel, but that's kind of what you want. So anyways, EPS box is all wired in. ABS is pretty easy. It's again, you've got all 4 wheel speed sensors, so there's 4 wires going to each wheel speed. Sorry, there's 2 wires going to each wheel speed. And then you have your ground. You have main power. There's actually a backup power as well, so there's 2 big, kind of like, I think they're like 10 gauge or 12 gauge wires for the power. And then you have a power input from the PDM, just tells it when to turn on. We have a brake switch, which is right here. We're using the factory brake switch. Just tells when the brakes are on. That also drives the brake lights. And then the only other wire I hook up is the ABS light indicators. This will tell us when there's an ABS fault. And I have that wired into the PDM. One of the channel inputs, it needs a pull up resistor, pull up or pull down, can't remember. Anyways, it needs a resistor because typically it would run an actual light to a diode. But in this case we don't have anything, so there needs to be a pull up or down resistor. I forgot which one, but that's wired into the PDM, and then that will alert us on the dash when the ABS is not working. So kind of nice to have. The other stuff we have wired in, we've got tail lights wired in. Basically just we have tail lights for when our running lights are on, and then brake lights. And then I repurpose because we're using the factory rear, part of the factory rear harness. I repurpose the reverse lights to be my rain light. So don't have the rain light hooked up yet, but I just kind of reuse a few of the wires that are there. The headlights, I've got a low beam and a high beam wired in there, and that goes to the PDM. And then my fan. The only other thing would be the engine ECU. So 6 total wires there out of the engine harness, and that does everything. I will note that I am using a couple fuses. No relays or anything, but just some of the bigger fuses. So we have this set up so the kill switch, when that turns on, your ABS and power steering are going to have full-time power, because those will take about 60 to 80 amps, up to 60 or 80 amps. Instead of using a bunch of outputs out of here, I just run them through fuses. The EPS and ABS aren't actually on. It's just the main power, the main power for the ABS pump, or the EPS box is being fed power, but the signal is not on. And this is actually how it's hooked up via factory. So I also have this kill switch hooked up probably a little differently than most. The kill switch is hooked up via a ground switch. So this supplies the ground to the battery ground. And then this kill switch actually has 2 other switches inside it, and this is the power for the coils. So when you turn this on, it completes the ground circuit plus completes the power circuit for the coils, which I have the coil power coming out of here, goes over into here, and then out back into the engine harness. So when you break the kill switch, it disconnects the ground plus disconnects the power to the coils, shutting the engine off. The reason I like doing that is you have less power, less hot power running all through the car back from kill switches and back and forth. I kind of like it so that if these get touched by anything while working on the car, it's really not a big deal at all. It's just great. We got to set up the keypad, configure some of the outputs, which I kind of start using a lot of the same pinouts and stuff on all of the cars I've done, so I can just start with a kind of like a base map for the PDM. But there's a few differences here I need to set up, so yeah, start doing that.